Well, hello, all and sundry. Welcome back to your favorite Jackson show, The Good Jackson. Joining me today is my host and co host, Peter of Gonna Go For It fame.
Hello. Let's hope this is going to be a long show, longer than what was it, 10 minutes last time? I don't think we even made 10 minutes. But
Well, 10 minutes is pretty average for guys in my country, so,
well, I do want to apologize. So I lost power for about 10 and a half hours. Really enjoyed that because then I don't have any coffee, don't have any computer, I've got nothing because I'm in a wood. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. But let's
yeah.
let's hope we have power for the entire show. That would really
Yeah,
improve the quality of the show, I think.
I agree. Yeah, that'd be great. And also joining me is one of my editors, Nestlig.
Hello, I hope my mic is all right even now. Is my
It's
mic all right?
it's
Yeah,
great.
sounds great.
All right,
It's great.
good to be back.
Um, which I haven't been putting Nestle to work recently because I have not been writing any scripts until the past few days because I have a class that is that I'm teaching, not that I'm in, that I'm teaching starting next month, and so I've been preparing all of the materials for that class, and it's pretty nearly done now, so that's great. Um, and so I
Teaching in
finally
the summer. Are you teaching
yes,
in the summer? Yes.
Oh,
yep.
you're gonna teach kids. You're gonna indoctrinate kids in the religion of evolution.
I wish. Unfortunately, I'm not
Oh,
teaching biology. I'm
ah,
basically teaching this class called Foundations in Science, which is essentially like an intro physics kind of course. Um so interesting. So yeah, so there's that. And then so yeah, so I just finally these past few days have gotten around to doing the brine shrimp's tale, which I'm almost finished with. It's like the script itself is 7 pages, so it's not going to be quite as
Oof.
long as our
Oof.
last few videos, but still, it's like it's like 4 pages of sources also, so that's fun. Um, so yeah, it'll be cool. I'm excited for it. We finally get into the arthropods and their whole group. And
Yeah.
arthropods,
Just 30 minutes for the arthropod. Yeah, 30,
yeah, just
30
30
minutes.
minutes for arthropods. Yeah. Um, I've been learning some really interesting stuff about um like different worms that are maybe like ancestral to the arthropod or to the panarthropods, because you have like the lobopods, which are the walking worms that just kind of look like little, they just look like worms with little simple legs.
Are they called lobopods or lobopodians? Like I think I've heard
Well,
lobopodians
it's a
more often.
well, it's both, but it's a paraphyletic grouping, right? So I mean, it's not it's
are,
a
Yeah.
grade rather than a clade.
are
It's
you are you
it's basically
including worms that house themselves in the heads of presidential candidates?
We'll talk about that. We'll get to that.
I
We'll
think
get
I
there.
think they're called lobotomy worms.
Um, so yeah, I definitely want to talk about that in a moment. Um, also, hello everyone who is watching. We have Katina, Caden, Triceratops, Dragon Spartan, the Unlucky Legume, Nan, Jamie E. Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Um, so yeah, Lobopod or Lobopodians, either way. Which also confusingly, Lobopodia is also the name for the hypothesis that onychophorans and tardigrades are sister, to the exclusion
yeah.
of arthropods.
Hmm.
So that's a little confusing. But yeah, Lobopodia is a grade of like primitive panarthropods that kind of leads to all three of the
Yeah.
extant clades. So yeah. And then like
It's like the how do you call them again? The ancestors of the carnivorans.
oh, the Miacids.
And the Miacids, yes. Like it's like
Mhm.
the Miacid equivalent of Panarthropoda, yes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then what's also cool is there are like, oh hey, there's Prophet of Zod in there. That's cool. Um, there are also, um, wait, add him as a moderator. Um, these worms that are ecdysozoans that are possibly ancestral, or sorry, are more stem than the lobopods. So you essentially have everything from like you have essentially worms, right? You have these guys that look kind of like penis worms, the preapulids. So the preapulid form may itself be ancestral for ecdysozoans as a whole, which would kind of make sense because there seems to be argumentation that the ability to shed your skin, which is ecdysis, is the result of living in the sand. So if you live in the sand, you need a tough exoskeleton to protect you against like friction from the sand grains. But at the same time, if you make this your cuticle too tough, you can't grow continuously, so you have to shed it regularly. Um, so you have something that's like an ecdysis, like a preapulid, which is uh, something like that would have been ancestral to all ecdysozoans. Then a particular group of worms, like the cricocosmiids, would have been ancestral to the lobopods, and then the lobopods are then ancestral um, to the panarthropods. So you have this really like a whole uh, series of transitional forms. So anyway, that's really
Yeah,
cool.
it's surprising that how like of course worms is not one group, of course. You have
Like a
worms
dozen
close to
different
us.
groups, yeah.
Yeah, you have worms closer to the arthropods and worms closer to the mollusks and such. And I like
Yep.
whenever I think about this, I am reminded of like a very funny quote by Sir Frank. Do you know the channel Sir Frank?
Oh, so Frank, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
that one.
he has the Morgan Freeman voice, and he does very funny commentary on
Mhm.
animals. And this one quote, I looked it up. The quote goes like this: "Remember, we are all just tubes with some fancy bits attached, looking for stuff to put in the front and finding places to put whatever comes out the other side." Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like that channel, it's pretty funny. Um, so yeah. So, yeah, the brainworm, so it turns out, RFK, so Robert Kennedy Jr., who is a nominal Democrat, um, he's running for president, had a brainworm that ate part of his brain and then died in his brain. Probably had food poisoning. So, so yeah, that's
Well,
cool.
as funny as that may be, it is not actually eating anything, because there is nothing there is nothing left.
that's
No,
that's fair. You got me there. Yeah.
but to be serious for one moment, like the real story is like sometimes, very rarely, you have tapeworms that are able
hmm
to enter the bloodstream and become a cyst
hmm
anywhere in the body, and sometimes the cyst ends up in the brain. And that's basically, and the worm does not consume anything.
Yeah.
But still, it's
So that
still hilarious.
that's what happened
Yeah,
to
it
the
is pretty
orange
wild.
candidate then. I mean,
No, he was just born that way, unfortunately.
oh,
So
okay.
yeah, the worm died of starvation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it is pretty wild that happened. Yeah, pretty crazy. That's almost the funniest thing that's happened to a candidate recently. I mean, we still have
yeah.
the main one of the main candidates who is facing charges for for misappropriating funds to that were hush money for a porn star he cheated on his wife with. So there's that also.
Yeah.
Which a thing that I do you guys ever see that movie Citizen Kane?
No.
Old movie. It's a Rosebud. Like that's his last words, before he dies, and a bunch of journalists are trying to figure out what Rosebud was. Well, he has an affair. While he's running for, I think it was it mayor? I think. You guys in the audience correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he was married. Anyway, turns out he has an affair. Of course, he resigns. He stops running because it's so scandalous. The ignominy of having of cheating on your wife during a campaign is just so horrendous. And nowadays, it's almost like a badge of honor. So,
One of the funniest
um,
things I saw on Twitter is a picture of a very mad Melania, and it had the caption, "When your husband wishes you a happy birthday from his hush money porn star trial," something along those lines. I thought that was pretty funny.
yeah. Oof.
And of course, now you have also his lawyers arguing that he cannot be persecuted for anything he does as president, basically.
Yeah.
That's also funny.
While blaming the current
Mhm.
president doing things that he's not allowed to do.
But it's of course disingenuous argument. They themselves don't believe in that position. It's just a strategy to like delay the actual trial that they will put him in jail.
Governor.
Like it's
Sorry,
delaying.
Jamie, he was correcting me. He was running for governor in the film. That's what it was.
What just gets me is that how many times has he now been held in contempt and threatened that they will throw him in jail, and they don't?
I mean, if he were a normal person, he would have been in jail a long time ago.
Yes. Anyway. Which leads me which leads me to think that the judge might not be the good judge for this particular trial, because if that's how he's starting out,
yeah, that's pretty whack.
Yeah.
If this was 2015, then he would be in jail by now.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah. So anyway, what else happened? Okay, so also I went viral on Twitter this past week, so that was neat. Your favorite creationist responded to me, Nestlig, the Bible radio app guy. For anyone who does not remember the lore, Bible radio app was the guy who was arguing that thermodynamics disproves evolution. Nestlig had a multi-day conversation with him in which he eventually just disappeared, right? He just kind of left.
It's a long story. Like, just to summarize, after we had him on our show, I talked with him via messages on Twitter for about I don't know exactly how long, but I think it was a week or more.
Yeah,
I think it was more. I think it was about 2 weeks.
Yeah. 2 weeks then. It was about 2 weeks, and eventually he just stopped responding. He told me, "Oh, I need time to digest this. I will come back to you later." So I did not press him on anything. I just kept quiet and waited for his response.
Sure.
And then a month later, I saw him using the exact same argument against you, I believe, or maybe somebody else.
Yeah.
And I responded to him, "Oh, wait a minute, why?" We were talking about this in direct messages, and then he told me, he asked me whether I want to have a
Twitter
conversation,
like a Spaces chat or whatever. Yeah,
like a actual talk conversation. No messages anymore, just a direct conversation with the microphone.
Right.
And that was also about a few weeks ago by now. And again, since we had that conversation with the microphone. Nothing from him. Yeah.
That's except for the fact that he keeps posting on my comments, because every time I post something, he shows up in my comments and posts something, which led us to where we are now. He's been doing the Haranyaya tactic, as we call it here on this channel, and I hope that gains more traction in the wider world. So the Haranyaya tactic, again, for anyone who's not familiar with the lore, goes a bit like this. You post a picture of a fossil and a modern organism that looks similar to it, and just declare that they're the same animal or plant. And that's it. That's the whole thing. That's all it takes. You just kind of declare evolution hasn't happened.
You call it a lore. I still call it a lure. Because you can post a picture of a fishing lure.
Yeah.
And a modern animal.
True.
That's still because the funniest thing I've ever seen a creationist do. put it in a book, a fishing lure with the hook clearly visible and saying, this is the fossil and here's the animal now, which is a fishing lure. I mean, yeah.
Right. Yeah. For I think you guys all probably know, but in case anyone who like watches this later doesn't, yeah, Harun Yahya is an Islamic creationist who I think he's in prison for eternity now or whatever.
Yeah.
And so one of the things he did before getting put in prison for like sex trafficking or whatever, was he made this huge book in which he did that just over and over and over again. And some of the pictures of modern organisms were fishing lures. So
Yeah.
instead of actual insects. So that's pretty well. Richard Dawkins wrote about it in The Greatest Show on Earth. Um, oh, hey, DM Original In Situ Academic Excavation Wing has been a member for 7 months at the bacteria level. Nice. Hello. Thanks for being a member. Um, so, yeah. So, very silly stuff. I think also.
His example was a snail, right? Like I remember, and I remember seeing
Yeah.
the tweets that you
Yeah.
responded to. Like there was like a
Oh,
snail
yes.
from the Cambrian,
No, that was a
and a
different guy.
mother and a snail. Oh,
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. No, you're right. You're right.
and
Okay.
the same guy, the same
Yes.
guy.
So
The
Bible Radio
yeah.
app. So the guy who you talked to, yes, posted 2 snails, or a picture in which it said that one snail. It said this fossil was 555 million years old. A
Yeah, from
555
the
million year old
Cambrian.
snail. That is
Even before the
pre-Cambrian.
Cambrian.
That is
Even
a
before, yeah.
that is a late Ediacaran snail. Now now I quoted it and was like, wow, a Precambrian snail. Wow, I wonder why there's no evidence of that in the academic literature or whatever. And that post got like 43,000 likes as of right now, which is insane for me. That's my posts usually cap out around like maybe 100. But yeah, 43,000. That's absolutely insane. What else? Something else. Oh, even there was even a community notes post on the Bible Radio app's a picture.
Yeah.
Which, it's so funny. And then another guy, who another creationist, kept posting more and more of those. Like he kept responding to my comments and like posting. He posted like a picture that had like 6 of those on it, and for the ones I could verify, because it's probably not a it's probably a feature, not a bug, of these memes that it's very hard to figure out like what the fossil is, right? Because for the snail, for instance, I eventually managed to figure out what the like living snail is. It's a species of land snail that's very common in Europe, and it's only been around for like what, a few tens of thousands of years or something like that is the most I could find for it. And then the picture of the fossil that it said was 555 million years old was only like maybe 37 million years old, something like that. Yeah.
Holy.
You know, a little different, only slightly different.
And if I'm not mistaken, like the earliest stem gastropods, so the group that includes snails and the relatives, the earliest stem members are from the Cambrian, and the earliest known crown members are from the Ordovician, and the earliest terrestrial gastropods are from the Carboniferous.
Yeah, I think
so.
You're
Yeah,
right.
it's not far from the Precambrian snail that you need.
And what would be so funny about that is that would be like wouldn't that blow the creationist arguments out of the water, because we're finding bilaterians in the Precambrian? You know, I don't know. Just because you have guys over like the Discovery Institute who are constantly arguing that, oh, we don't find animals in the Precambrian, which we do, of course. They're just liars. But
it's a catch-22. If you have a very good transitional fossil, it becomes very ambiguous to what group it belongs to, because it's so transitional. Like, oh, is it maybe a bit closer to the arthropods or a bit closer to the annelids, for example, or something like that. But then when it becomes very identifiable, then they will say, oh, it's just a modern organism, because it's easily
Right.
identifiable. It's a catch-22 situation with that. Yeah.
Yeah, heads I win, tails you lose. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, he made it a
Um,
little easier for him to win too, because he one of his last replies was, well, it may not be the same animal, but they look fairly the same, so they obviously didn't evolve. Evolution didn't act on them, which I thought was a weird claim to make. They're not the same animal. All the animals you posted before that are the same animal are not the same animal.
yeah, he said they were identical. His
Yes.
original claim, and I bet his Twitter account. I said, I bet your
Yeah, I
Twitter
saw
account that
that.
none of these are the same. He like it took him like a day to respond to me basically, and I was like, you're welcome to come on. I'm happy to talk to you. We can go over each of these fossils, and so I did eventually because we had to follow each other because he's a check mark, which red flag there, but he's a check mark. So we both have to follow each other for me to DM him. So I did. I DM'd him and I said, hey, my show's on Thursday. And I took a screenshot of it and posted it in one of the conversations. It's like, hey, we do our show on Thursday at 7 Central. If you want to come on, we're fine having you. He never responded. Never responded to that.
No.
He may not. I don't know. But I told him. But yes, originally he said that they were identical. He said the fossil and the modern organism were
Or
identical,
identical. Yeah.
which is why I bet him his channel or his Twitter account. Because I was like, "There's no way you can defend this." And then he turned around and said, well, you're being dishonest. I didn't mean it was completely identical. I mean, it just meant they were very similar. Well,
Yeah.
hold on a second. You said identical. Here's the screenshot of it or the
Yeah.
link to it. Yeah, it was very funny he was calling me dishonest when he said identical and then was like, "No, I didn't actually mean identical." Okay, well then why'd you say it? Yeah, then he was like, it was if they're 10 to 15% similar, which I don't even know how you would measure that. I genuinely don't know.
It's a gut feeling.
You you
It's like
eyeball it.
kind.
You
Like kind.
eyeball
So
it.
like, oh, it
Yeah.
looks the same,
Yeah.
about the same. Yeah,
Yeah, you eyeball it, and
Yes,
then
yeah.
it helps that in fossils you don't have colors, so you have a bigger range to choose from, right? So I mean, it's
Yeah,
great.
it was very silly. So I guess he's not coming on. Whatever. If he decides to come on, we'll have him. Fine.
Smitty makes a very maybe a very good prediction that some creations will probably use. Here's a thylacine skull and here's a mother wolf. No evolutionary change. So something
Yeah.
that's something I would expect to see in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, I would honestly wouldn't be surprised. So yeah, the funny thing is some of those animals on there. So one was a picture of uh Diplomys Diplomystus, which is a fish, and then it said, and then the orange ruffy, which are not only in different, not only different species, in different genera, in different families, in different orders of fish. So completely different all the way across the board.
But they are
Um,
still fish, Jackson.
Yeah, and they
oh,
look the
yeah.
same. They're 15% identical.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means, but yeah, exactly. They're
It's so funny. Like for some groups, they have like it's that the resolution becomes very high. Like for example, between the apes, like oh, humans are totally different from chimpanzees.
Right.
But when it comes to fish, oh, they are all the same basically, all fish.
Nestle, I don't know if you've seen the one, but there's one I've seen more than once where it says Pikaia as the fossil and then a modern eel as the living analog.
What?
Now, for reference, for anyone who's not aware, Pikaia is an invertebrate. It is basically a worm with a fin. It has no jaw. It has no bones, no backbone. Basically, almost none of the characteristics that make fish fish. It like if you don't know anything about it at all, it kind of vaguely looks like an eel. So I guess there's that. I mean, the fact that it doesn't have a jaw should probably tip you off, but whatever. It's fine, I guess. So yeah. Oh, you're right. Okay. So anyway, all of that aside, we can get to the video. So we're skipping the rest of that lawyer's video. and we're going to Kurt Wise. He's going to talk about his flood fan fiction. So Kurt Wise is a zoologist who works for the Answers in Genesis, and he gave a presentation on what the pre-flood world looked like. Ooh, so this is his fan fiction.
Okay.
Yes, Pikaia is an early core date. Yeah, it is. Caden, you're right. It's an invertebrate, so it has no backbone. Basically, the characteristics that distinguish Pikaia as a core date are like it has pharyngeal arches.
Okay, is Pikaia like closer to us than the Lancelet, or is it outside the chordate crown group? Pikaia?
It is. I from what I've seen, it's typically regarded as a stem lancelet.
Oh yeah. So it would make more sense to compare it to the Lancelet rather than an eel.
Right. Yeah, at least if you compare it to a lancelet, you'd at least have something there, even though it has those weird like tentacles on its head. But anyway, so all right, so we ready to get into Kurt Wise's fan fiction?
We can.
Sure. Oh, also one last question about Kurt Weiss. I
Okay.
remember Dawkins saying like Kurt Weiss, like, or maybe somebody else was it? Like somebody cut up the Bible.
That was
like
Wise.
removing that was Wise. Yeah, like
Yeah.
he removed every piece of the Bible that conflicted with science, and he was left with ribbons basically. Like he got almost everything out from the Bible that did not fit science. And so Kurt Weiss made the decision to completely throw out all of science just to save his own personal religious view.
As you do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Want to skip to the video, Jackson?
Yeah, let's jump on in. Let's see what his fan fiction world is like.
The design of the lectures this particular day, the presentations this particular day, which focused really on the pre-Cambrian, the pre-flood, the flood, post-flood boundary, or flood, pre-flood boundary. It was really my intent in suggesting that we have a day of focus on this, to focus on things we don't know much about. I don't know that that issue has come across. Each one of us, I think, has tried to make it sound like we understand what in the world we're talking about. But when it comes to reconstructing Earth history, I don't know. I'd like to create what I'm about to describe to help people understand it. But it is this: is if you have a picture that you're going to make into a jigsaw puzzle. So you create the picture. You then chop it up into a jigsaw puzzle with all the pieces, in that fashion. Now, let us take the jigsaw puzzle pieces and mix them up, and then make another jigsaw from that. Okay, so you rearrange all the pieces and then you glue them all together or whatever in that new arrangement. Now let's make a new jigsaw puzzle of that mess. And then take those pieces, jiggle them up, and fuse them together, and then make a third jigsaw puzzle out of that. Now, put the pieces back together again. You might find it fairly easy to put the first order jigsaw puzzle piece together and realize that you now have pieces of an earlier puzzle that you now have to cut up and somehow rearrange and put together. When you has
Kurt Wise ever used a puzzle before or played with one?
So basically what he's explaining is you take everything you have and you create completely new stories with that, because the puzzle is going to depict something completely different from the original, and then you have stuff left to create a new picture, and then you're going to find out that you're in trouble because there are pieces in puzzle number 1 that need to go in puzzle number 3 because you're out of puzzle pieces. Why not put the puzzle back together the way it should be, and don't use glue? Because here's a clue. Here's a clue. If you need glue, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, I think I think someone needs to do the next puzzle with Kurt because I think he's a little confused on how to do the puzzle.
Someone needs to explain puzzles to this guy because this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard so far.
Yeah.
That new
Well,
picture, you realize
pause for a moment. What does the slide say? Hydrothermal blown?
Oh, hydrothermal. Oh, you're right. I just assumed it said thermal. You're right.
Yeah.
A pre-flood
Yeah.
environment. Oh well, it's just a typo. Oh well.
All right.
it's a picture of further puzzle pieces that have been rearranged from a previous time. And you then have to cut that up, rearrange it,
I can
and
only
put
imagine
it back
his
together
audience.
again. The farther you reach back in time in geology, the more of those successive jigsaw puzzle pieces we have. We look at the recent geology, hey, that's almost no-brainer. Easy to put the puzzle pieces together. But the farther we go back in time, the more the pieces have been arranged, rearranged. The old rocks of the Earth, in fact, have been rearranged a number of times. And to make it worse,
Okay, now he's going to trigger Kent Hovind. There are no old rocks. Everything's the same age, according to Kent Hovind. So, because...
Well, he's also a creationist.
Yes, but so the world was formed, so everything was on the world, and you just rearrange it. It's all the same age. Doesn't matter where the layers are. The age is exactly the same. So...
the only way I can understand this argument is if he's talking about like continental drift. Like, of course, the further back you go, the reconstruction of the continental positions becomes very difficult to reconstruct. So maybe he's talking about that. I'm not sure.
I think that's what he's referring to. AIG believes like in what was it, Rodinia, and then like Rodinia formed into Pangaea, and then the Pangaea like split into the modern continents, right? They believe in like super rapid plate tectonics, which of course would boil the surface of the Earth.
Yeah.
Because
magnitude 15 earthquake.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So because basically what the mantle, like the movement of the continents, right, they're on top of this like super hot mantle, and then that's kept like a very hot, in part because of the breakdown of like radioactive elements in the Earth's core, and so
not in the Earth's core, more like in the mantle.
Okay,
because the Earth's core is mostly iron and nickel, and those are not radioactive.
Oh, in the lower mantle. Right?
Yes.
Okay, so these are in the lower mantle, and these are keeping the mantle like I guess kind of semi-liquid, and very warm. And so
it's also like a fun fact, like in the core, you have two layers, the inner core and the outer core, and the inner core is solid. And so what happens is over time, as the core cools down, the inner core grows because the outer core freezes onto the inner core, and that releases latent heat also.
Okay, I got you.
Yes.
Okay. And like for the continents to move faster, like you'd have to have these processes like going at like rapid speed to like allow these continents to move around, and that just isn't how that works, right? Because that would also cook everything on the planet.
Someone should make a movie about this. So I'm picturing koalas hanging on for dear life as Australia splits off and speeds through the ocean to the place where it's now. It would explain how koalas got there quite easily.
Also, Mr. Cliff for $2. Moo. Thank you. So yeah. So this is all basically this is all encompassed by the what's called the heat problem. Basically the heat generated by the continents moving around at rapid speed, by the radioactive elements decaying rapidly. This would all generate so much heat that it would just fry everything on Earth many, many, many times over. And creationists don't have any way to fix that problem. They have none. So there's that. Anyway, we can keep going.
We've got in creationism a catastrophe or two that really muddles the pieces up. So the farther you go back in time in creationist history, it's a really substantial.
You got a catastrophe or two? Yeah, Ken Ham, Kent Hovind. Those are the catastrophes who are muddling the things up. Sorry.
Challenge. You can do the post-flood Arphaxadian period fairly well in reconstruction.
The what?
As soon as you move into the flood, you've got a major rearrangement, and the more difficult, the farther back in the flood you go, the worse it gets. It's even worse if you want to figure out what's going on in the pre-flood world, because it's got all the rearrangements of the entire flood and the post-flood that have been superimposed upon the data. That sort of thing, in one sense, would probably make most people go, I don't want to deal with this. I'll deal with the post-flood. It's easier to deal with. For some of us, like myself.
Okay, another problem I just remembered is the fact that there is no agreed upon consensus for when is post-flood and when is pre-flood for the creationist. Whenever people like Wise appear, or Ken Ham or Kent Hovind or whomever, well, I guess not really Kent Hovind, because he doesn't think the geological column is real at all, which is just inane. But typically, when you have guys like from AIG or ICR or CMI, these different organizations have different time periods for what parts of the geological record they think is explained by the flood, and they do not agree with each other. So some of them think that it's like the Ice Age is post-flood. So basically the last 12,000 years is post-flood, where everything prior to that is pre-flood. Some of them think that the end of the Cretaceous, so the KPG boundary, is what divides pre-flood from post-flood. Basically, they think the everything in the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic is flood deposit, and Precambrian is pre-flood deposit. There's no consistency among these groups. There just isn't. They all have different ideas for what they think is explained by pre-flood and post-flood. So there is no unified or hypothesis or model.
How would they explain the absence of if they believe that the Paleozoic and Mesozoic are the flood layers? How do they explain the absence of the Mesozoic mammals or any other Mesozoic group in that? How do they explain the absence of that?
Nestle, have you considered don't worry about it?
Magic, yes.
Magic, yeah.
Nestle, are you expecting creationists to explain things? I'm just wondering.
Yes, I have too much of a standard.
That's a novel idea, Nestle. I think you should talk about creationists, talk with creationists about this, because that would be a novel idea. Explain it instead of just claiming it. I mean, I've just entered a conversation on Twitter where a creationist tells me that every claim you make is true until someone can prove you wrong. So I now have a lot of money. Prove me wrong.
All right, we can keep going.
I like the greater challenge. The more successive reiterations of the data, scramblings of the data, almost the better it is.
He is definitely scrambling the data.
But it is challenging. And there is much, much, much about the pre-flood world we do not understand. And there's much about those pre-flood rocks that we are only just beginning to understand. There's lots of them. There's tens
I'd add in there's much of the post-flood world you don't understand. Basically, there's just much you don't understand. That's basically it.
There's a lot they don't understand. That is
Yes.
true.
Of thousands of feet of these rocks in some places, and there's been very little work done on them, partly because there's so few of us to do the work,
Oh, I
but
wonder why
also
that
because
is.
of the challenge of the interpretation. And a further challenge, I suppose you'd have to throw in there is some of the things that Andrew.
I also like that he said there's so few of us to do the work, because obviously these scientists aren't doing the work. The geologists and I mean biologists, they're not doing anything to help. Which is
Right, and what's funny is there are lots of scientists who study Precambrian rocks, whether it's the organisms in them or the actual just rocks themselves. Heck, Andrew Snelling, before he became a creationist hack, some of his work
Before he
was
got brainworms.
before he got the
yeah.
brainworm. His work was on Precambrian strata. For was it in Australia? I think. Um, and so, yeah, like there are lots of scientists who work on Precambrian rocks, but there are not many creationists because creationism is wrong, and most scientists recognize it's wrong. But of
Yeah.
course, it's they have the creationists have a religious imperative to support creationism instead of just following the data where it leads. So
Was talking about, we have to consider what God might have created in the beginning. So perhaps he created an earth with a jigsaw puzzle already in place. And we might be reconstructing a history that never happened in those rocks.
Pause.
And that's
Okay, so that's called the Omphalos hypothesis, which when you start playing with the Omphalos hypothesis, or like assuming age, then you start getting into things like last Thursdayism, which is like a logical kind of consequence of saying things like, oh well, maybe God just created like sequoia trees old, or
With tree
or
rings.
right, with tree rings, or maybe God created light like in transit. It's like, well, yeah, sure, God could have. Oh, thunder. Sure, God could have done that. I mean, he's God after all. But when you get into that, then you start having to wonder, like, well, how do we differentiate things that are actually old from things that merely look old? And I have never seen any creationist even
It's
attempt to tackle that. So,
like evidence becomes meaningless at a point.
yes.
If you have one piece of data, like, oh, it could mean anything. Literally, it could mean anything
Yeah,
at
you
that
lose
point.
the ability to rationally like interact with reality. You just can't do it.
I'm
Which is
curious.
so ironic because that's the argument they make against the atheists who don't have any rational, logical foundation for their cognitive faculties. Like this is
Right.
so ironic. Oh.
I recently was in an argument with a creationist who told me that God created everything with age. And then I thought, so if you were to find a tree, an original created tree, fossilized, would it have one giant ring on the outer side, and then in the middle the smaller rings are forming because it was created with age? So you should have a period where there were no summers and winters, right? It was created with age, so that there shouldn't be any rings.
Mm-hmm.
And I never got an answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's possible to, differentiate um apparent age from actual age once you start doing that. So it's just kind of game over at that point. So, yeah.
Yeah.
challenge. Where's the line where actually creation begins? What I wanted to do is to
That is an actual question.
consider at least one one example of reconstructing some of Earth history, specifically a time
Okay.
before the flood, based upon some of this scrambled evidence that we have. And it's
right.
specifically something that ultimately I would interpret as a hydrothermal biome. I first
Okay.
want to look at the data as it's often understood in the conventional wisdom.
Oh boy.
There is, in fact, a superphylum or above the level of phylum stratomorphic series in the fossil record.
Oh yes,
So
yes.
we're
Pause.
talking
Yeah,
above.
pause. So in chapter, I think it's either 6 or 7 of the rocks were there. RJ and I talk about this. So yeah, and I think Caden mentioned it earlier. Um, oh, where was it? Yeah, Caden mentioned it. Um, oh, it's somewhere. Basically, Kurt Wise is the guy who came up with the idea of like these stratomorphic intermediates, which is just his term for like transitional fossils. So Wise is in a very interesting place. He's kind of like Todd Wood in that he accepts that there is evidence for evolution and that the evidence seems pretty good, but that we can like reinterpret it in a biblical framework, right? By which he means young Earth creationist. Um, and so he acknowledges like fully, and I think that's what he's about to do, that you can see this this series in the geological column. So yeah, he just is full like, yeah, amphibians show up first, then reptiles, then like mammals and birds. Yeah, and that all seems like evidence for evolution. So yeah, it's crazy stuff.
Is Kurt Weiss going to argue that the Ediacaran fauna were like chemolithotrophs that are like associated with hydrothermal vents or something
I
like
wouldn't
that?
be surprised because that's what that one dude tried arguing with us when we had the creation open mic. Because remember he tried doing like, oh well, they're deep down because they are in a deep environment. And
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if he also tries this, which doesn't work because I'm pretty sure most of the like fossil bearing facies in the Precambrian are like pretty shallow, if I remember correctly. They're not deep sea because the deep sea was not oxygenated until the like very end of the Precambrian, right at this like going into the
Yeah.
Cambrian. So there were no the macrofossils that did exist are not from the deep sea in the Precambrian.
I believe they were below like the light zone where
Yeah, they may not have
the,
been in the
si- the
photic zone. Yeah,
but they were not deep as in like the hydrothermal vents that
right.
that maybe not no.
Yeah,
But I'm not sure how the Ediacarans, like I've seen that they were passive filter feeders, or maybe they passively absorbed nutrients from the water column. Like
Mhm.
those ideas are consistent with their fractal body plans. Like they have a very very high surface to volume ratio, which is very convenient if you want to absorb things from the water column, like
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, which yeah, it makes sense. It also makes sense like that because from some recent papers, you have like sponges as the like most basally derived animals, and then you have like Charnia as one of the like most basally derived eumetazoan. So it's a stem eumetazoan, and then you have like the like Proarticulata, which is a stem bilaterian. So yeah, all these weird dudes. Okay, we can
Super
keep going.
above phylum would be kingdom level sequence of
Mhm.
fossils that evolution maintains can be explained by evolution and might be a challenge to other worldviews. And it's really easiest seen in the fact that the Precambrian has no macrofossils. In other words, no fossils you can see with the naked eye. The
Well, that's not
fossils we
true.
have are microfossils.
Well, hold on. Pause.
As a matter of
Well, okay. most of the Precambrian has microfossils, but there are macrofossils. In fact, Dickinsonia got up to the size of a bath mat. This idea that there are no macrofossils in the Precambrian is just flatly incorrect. Charnia, also visible with the naked eye. There are a number of algae that are known from the Precambrian that are visible with the naked eye. That's just plain wrong. It's true that they are preceded also, and as evolution would predict, by microscopic ancestors who were unicellular, and we do also have some bacterial fossils and some fossils that might be bacteria. Like there's these fossils from the apex shirt, which might be bacteria or might not be. It's there's a big back and forth over them. But then there are also like cyanobacterial fossils that are pretty well known, and fossils of like acritarchs, which might be
Yeah.
eukaryotes.
At some point, the biggest fossils you can find are like stromatolites, basically like
Mhm.
big concrete deposits of the cyanobacteria. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Fact, no valid, what we now understand to be valid fossils from the Precambrian were understood until 1954. Before that, there were claims of fossils from the Precambrian, but they have been reinterpreted as non-fossil material. And
Okay.
it's only with the advent of the application of the microscope to the Precambrian rocks that we discovered bacterial fossils, that we
Okay.
actually could see real fossils in the Precambrian. Also,
Okay.
a closer examination of the rocks just immediately below the Cambrian revealed that there were actually, but there are not very many places in the world where these rocks exist. On the North American continent, we have the Great Unconformity. That Great Unconformity is found on most continents. And it's very difficult to find a
Okay.
place where the unconformity doesn't exist. Steve made reference to one place in the Mojave where we have a continuous sequence through the Great Unconformity. You could run the Great Unconformity into a sequence of sediments. So that's an erosional surface most of the places on the planet. But there's a few places, there's 12 of them, about 12 places on the planet where there's the rocks that eroded away in most places are actually preserved. That's not very many places. They've only recently been, relatively recently, in the last 30 years, been identified and recognized as such. And they've been able to stick, in a sense, sort of like stick some things in between the Cambrian and what used to be considered the Precambrian into the uppermost Proterozoic. And then, in fact, more recently, they've even inserted another system into the system beneath the Cambrian as the Vendian, based upon fossils, macrofossils that have been found below the traditional Cambrian in those few places where we actually have good preservation. And so in those places, such as in the Mojave, we have a sequence of fossils that in the Archean we have exclusively.
Like if I remember correctly, you have the White Sea and the Nama, and also
the Avalon.
The Avalon assemblages. Yes.
Those are all what early or no? Hold on, White Sea. No, that's all Ediacaran. Yeah, so those are like late Ediacaran fauna. I see the famous like test state amoeba from like 740 million years, and I can't ever remember what I can't remember where those guys were found. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, basically so those are like assemblages or biotas in the late Ediacaran, and we have like our very first like stem bilaterians and like you have some cnidarians, I believe, and some like potential sponges, which you kind of expect, right? Because in the Cambrian, we have a big radiation of bilaterian, well, and also non-bilaterian fauna. And just before that, you have your first stem bilaterians and also your metazoans. And a little bit before that, or quite a bit before that, we have our first evidence of sponges. So the first evidence of sponges is from about 650 million years ago. So actually in the Cryogenian, the period before
Mhm.
the Ediacaran, which and then yeah, before that you have like some uniconts and some eukaryotes, and then before that you have prokaryotes. So this all seems very evolutionary. Seems to fit pretty well within the evolutionary paradigm. I don't know.
Also, I'm his slide, like the slide he's now showing, is also a bit weird because like it
Mm-hmm.
shows on top the Atabanian fauna, and
Mm-hmm.
then the Timothian fauna, but the Timothian, the name Timothian fauna is like placed at the Vendian.
Yeah, that
So
is
it's
odd because
it's off,
Demotion is
yeah.
is Cambrian.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
and then Ediacaran fauna is like at the base of the Vendian. So yeah, it's very odd.
Yeah.
This is very strange. Yeah, not sure. Hmm.
But anyway, let's hear what the yes. I hope he gets to a point eventually.
Bacteria and something called stromatolites you've already been introduced to and we'll come back to in a moment here. But these are all bacterial or bacterial related. We assume that the stromatolites are basically built by bacteria, even though it's
Mm-hmm.
rare to actually find fossils of the bacteria in the stromatolites. Based upon similarity with stromatolites in the present, minuscule stromatolites, diminutive stromatolites in the present compared to the monsters in the fossil record. The modern stromatolites are formed by bacteria, so we presume that these are bacterial. So we've got literally thousands of feet of sediment in places where all we've got are bacteria. Then,
Mm-hmm.
as you move up into younger sediments, you get to a point where, in addition to the bacteria are found throughout the biostratigraphic column. In addition to bacteria, you will begin to find some algae.
Uh-huh.
Single-celled algae, unicellular algae, but algae nonetheless. And that's a significant difference from bacteria, very much larger organism. It's a eukaryotic
Mm-hmm.
organism. Cells are about 10 times minimum of 10 times the size of a typical bacterium. They also include cell components, cell organelles, such as nuclei. A little bit further up,
Mm-hmm.
usually not very far, very much further up in the pile, you begin to see protists, the algae being photosynthetic microorganisms, more specifically the unicellular photosynthetic microorganisms. Then we get unicellular non-photosynthetic organisms that
Well, here, let's
we
pause
would
for a
know
moment.
of as protists.
So actually, okay, well, this is a little weird. Because you do find both actually. Well, so unicellular algae are like typically considered under Protista also because protist is a grade, not a clade. It includes a bunch of different like unrelated groups. Protist just kind of means anything that's like microscopic and eukaryotic, and like
It's also,
non-animal.
yeah, it's also weird. Like kelp can also be considered a protist because you have,
Right.
like, originally you have I believe 5 kingdoms. Like you have
Mm-hmm.
the animals, plants, fungi, bacteria, and then the protists. So that
Mm-hmm.
means kelp or were kelp once considered plants. Like, I'm not sure if they were considered plants or not in the
I don't.
old system.
Maybe like a very, very old system, but like yeah,
Yeah.
for the last like
Protist is just an old term. Like, I think the only
I'm
reason why it's still in use today because we still have the field of how do you call it again? Proteology, or I'm not sure how it's the
protist. Is it? I just think that they're like if you study kelp, you're probably a botanist. If you I don't know, I don't. Yeah, I'm pretty sure if you study kelp, you're just like a botanist. I don't think. I think that falls under botany. Although botany is kind of broad, it's really weird because like zoology is just um Zoology is just
The field
animals.
is called protistology.
Yeah,
That's the field of science.
protistology. But yeah, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard anyone call it a protistologist. They're usually just like a microbiologist or something like that. You know, like we had Inaki Ruiz Trio on, who does study like unicellular organisms closely related to animals. So like Philosterians, Ichthyosporians, Coinoflagellates. And I genuinely don't think I've ever heard anyone like refer to someone as a protistologist. So uh yeah, I don't know. But anyway, the point is, um, so algae are like technically considered protist, but also the what he's talking about is the heterotrophs, the protists that the organisms that eat other organisms. They were also around at the same time. So it's not like algae came first and then you had so like the phototrophs came first and you had your or sorry the yeah the phototrophs and then your heterotrophs later. No, that's not what happened. You have both arising at the same time, or like really technically you had your heterotrophs first, and then a group of heterotrophs became the photoautotrophs by entering a symbiotic relationship with a cyanobacterial relative, which became the chloroplast, and then you get your archaeplastids, so your red algae, your green algae, and your blue-green algae from that. So that's one monophyletic group, and then you had a bunch of other protists who entered into symbiotic relationships with mostly with red algae, although a few of them did also green algae, and they were mostly in like the SAR groups. Uh, so then they also became photoautotrophs, although they could also do heterotrophy if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that a few protists secondarily, or sorry, no, a few protists have undergone a more recent endosymbiotic event
Yeah. Yeah.
with cyanobacteria, so like Pollinella, but it's using a different cyanobacteria than what archaeplastids use. So the archaeplastid cyanobacteria is something like Glio margarita. It's the chloroplast is very very similar in its genome to Glio margarita, but I believe the chloroplast in Pollinella is Senecacoccus, which is a different
Yes.
genus of cyanobacteria.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another one actually just came out recently that they're using that like a protist is using a nitrogen fixer, but it's a
Oh
different
yeah, that's a very recent one. Yeah.
yeah, but it's that one's also a completely different like genus
Mm-hmm.
of cyanobacteria. So yeah, like protists are just taken. They're doing basically if you're a photoautotroph, they're like, I'm going to take you and incorporate
Yonk.
you into my body, and you're going to make glucose for me. Yeah, they're just doing it like
You're in
left and right.
my household now. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have things like lichens, for instance, where you have like an
Yeah.
algae and at least one fungus and possibly a couple of different species of bacteria, and they all form a symbiotic relationship. But yeah, we did a video on it. It's called "Passing Chloroplasts," so go check that out if you want to know
It's
more about it.
yeah, lichens can be one fungi and one algae or one cyanobacteria or multiple
Mhm.
algae or multiple cyanobacteria. And also, I think there are also a few lichens that are multifungal as well. It gets pretty
Mhm.
crazy. And I also like one thing that I can also mention is that some of those SAR groups. I don't remember which specifically, but one of those SAR groups that originally got the endosymbiont from the red algae, they have
Mhm.
lost the ability to do photosynthesis. So and they became parasitic. And one of those is the infamous malaria parasite,
Yes.
Plasmodium. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I can't remember offhand which group that was, but yeah,
I think
because
it's
they
called the epicomplexan or something like
yeah,
that.
the
Yeah.
apicomplexans because it's
Yeah.
the chloroplast has become the apicoplast. So it's basically
Yes.
just helping them do the parasitism thing. It's not doing photosynthesis anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
super cool
yeah,
stuff.
the plastid still does something very important for them. They no longer
Yes.
they can no longer interact with the sunlight, but they still do something important. And the also funny thing is, because they have the plastids like that, the Plasmodium parasite is still vulnerable to herbicides. Very funny. Yeah,
Yeah,
really. Not kidding.
yeah, yeah. No, that's and it's also how researchers like Lynn Margulis figured out that like mitochondria are bacterial descendants. Is you can treat like human cells with like bactericidal stuff, and it won't affect most of the cell, but it will
Mhm.
affect the mitochondria, and
Yes.
vice versa. So yeah, if you
And
do,
then sometimes when people get like a very big antibiotic dose,
Mhm.
they will get that they will be very tired sometimes, and because the mitochondria are affected by that. Yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly, yep, okay, yeah, we can keep going.
For example, in most places around the world where these things first show up, they show up as, let's see, VSOs. VSOs, and that's hidden, that's an acronym for vase-shaped
Shaped
objects.
object, yeah, the testing
Or
amoeba, yeah.
vase-shaped objects. Really funny little things that look like little vases that you put flowers
Well,
in.
they're
So these are
testate
VSOs.
amoeba.
They are understood to be protists, or the tests of protists. In other words, the shells of protists. The algae show up earlier as what are called acritarchs. They're thought to be the sort of analogous to the spores of
Sort
the
of.
fungi, the resistant structures that are formed when the
Well,
environmental
let's pause for a
conditions
moment.
are
So okay, so there are definitely algae in the fossil record and going back pretty far. I think like Proterra cladus goes back like a billion years or so, and I think the earliest, or sorry, no, it's not the earliest. One of the earliest like macroscopic fossils is a red algae. It's called a Bangiamorpha. Um, but acritarchs. So the thing about acritarchs is they are not they're not identified. They're called acritarchs or something. A fossil is called an acritarch until it's identified. Basically, acritarchs are these, as he said, they're these like microscopic um, fossils that they're more complex than prokaryotes, so they are probably eukaryotes, but we don't know what kind of eukaryote. So if you have an acritarch and you know you find out that one of them has a particular set of characteristics that puts it in like the brown algae, well, it no longer becomes an acritarch. It becomes a brown algae fossil. So acritarchs probably are eukaryotes. Like most likely they're eukaryote fossils, but we just don't know what kind. And they show up like around like 1.8 billion years ago, which is very interesting because about 2 billion years ago was this event called the Great Oxygenation Event. So basically, what happened was cyanobacteria figured out how to do oxygenic photosynthesis. So they are giving off oxygen as a waste product of photosynthesis, and and in doing so, they outgassed so much into like the oceans that this eventually outgassed into the atmosphere, and that's why we have our atmosphere today. Our atmosphere is a byproduct of cyanobacteria. And so shortly thereafter, the endosymbiotic event between an archaean and a bacterium took place. So the archaean was the ancestor to the eukaryotes, and the bacterium was the ancestor to our mitochondria. And cellular or aerobic respiration, is the most efficient way to produce ATP, so cellular energy. So if that association had ever happened before, it wouldn't have been particularly beneficial for either member. But now your mitochondria or your protomitochondria can produce lots and lots and lots of ATP for the proto-archaean, and that is probably why that association lasted. It was beneficial for both, and why it has persisted to today, right? As eukaryotes. Nestle, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, it's of course we can do a whole episode on discussing the origins of eukaryotes. It's
Sure.
a very like I would recommend books by Nick Lane. He goes into
Mhm.
very great details about like if the Vital Question is one very good book where he goes into great details of the origins of eukaryotes and the symbiosis.
Yeah. Okay. It makes
Also,
sense.
also
difficult-
one.
Oh, sorry.
Never mind. Oh,
Oh,
sorry,
no, go
sorry.
ahead. No, go
Bad
ahead.
timing. Like I just found out that like in the Five Kingdom system, the kelp were considered plants.
Oh, they
Like
were okay.
yeah, the kingdom Plantae was divided
Mm.
into the green algae plus plants and the red algae
Mm.
and also the kelp group as well. And they
Mm.
were considered. Of course, it's a very wrong system.
Well, sure, and I mean
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
what, the 1960s, wasn't it, when that came out?
Yeah, yeah. I see like I'm now looking at the Whittaker's Five Kingdom system of
Mhm.
1969. Yes.
69. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Nice.
And
Are we-
they form these protective capsules, often extremely ornate, really fascinating structures. Again, we believe with a high degree of probability that these are in fact algae, although they don't exist in the present. They're really restricted to the early part of the fossil record. Really interesting things. So we begin getting acritarchs, and they become very abundant. We begin getting protists in the form of VSOs, and then there's a point at which in most of these localities, and now almost all 12 of the localities, we get a group of organisms known as the Ediacaran fauna, named after the type locality in Australia, Ediacara, where these were first discovered. This is a world of very strange animals. They're macrofossils. In fact, they're very large macrofossils. It's typically, they're 2 foot in size. There are very few small organisms. They're only preserved, almost always only preserved in sandstone. Sandstone isn't good at preserving things in micro detail, so the very large size is probably partly a consequence of what they're preserved in. Very characteristic biota. They're flat organisms. All of them are flat organisms. They're described as mattress organisms, or because they seem to be. They look very much like the flotation devices you might lay on in the water. You can blow them up, and then you get tubes, but they're woven together. Some of them look like worms. That's thought to look like a worm. Doesn't look much like a worm, but they are a large, flat-bodied organisms, soft-bodied, no hard parts. Above them, invariably following them, although you sometimes have Ediacaran fauna that continue, you have another group of organisms known as the Tomotian fauna, named after the Tomot area of Russia. These are really small. They are almost all cone-shaped calcium carbonate shells. You don't know what they are, but they could be little spicules on the skin of a soft-bodied animal. They could be a shell in which an organism actually lives. In other words, there's an organism smaller than that. The little guys are little. The largest one, I think, is about an inch long or something like that. They're really, really small.
So let's
they
pause for a
could
moment.
be.
So again, as we mentioned earlier, Tomotian is Cambrian. It's actually called, another name for it is Cambrian stage 2, which is trying to find like a good age for. It's basically like 529 to 521 million years ago. So early Cambrian. So what he's calling Tomotian fauna, I think he's referring to like the small shelly fauna, which actually start in the Nama assemblage of the late Ediacaran. So as Nestle mentioned earlier, you have the Avalon assemblage first, then you have the white sea assemblage, and then you have the Nama assemblage last for the Ediacaran. And so the Nama assemblage, you have basically like an extinction event at the very start of it, and it wipes out a lot of those weird pro-articulata guys like Dickinsonia, which is pictured there, and like Charnia, things like that. And you're kind of left with like a few of the weird fractal like rangiomorphs and some other interesting little guys like Eulingia, which is this weird worm-like dude. But yeah, most of most of those they don't have like quite symmetry. They have they don't have bilateral symmetry. They have glide symmetry, so it's almost bilateral symmetry, but not quite, which is kind of why they're thought to be um like stem bilaterians instead of crown bilaterians or something. Um, but then you have the small shelly fauna is just kind of an informal name for an assemblage of different organisms. So some of them are, as he mentioned, the remains of worm tests. So one of the most famous ones is called Cloudina or Cloudina, however you pronounce it. And this little guy, Cloudina, is very interesting because it has like bore holes in it. So like there were mollusk-like animals that were boring into these tubes that Cloudina was living in. Yeah, Smitty says bilateresque symmetry. And so it turns out now, because they're the pyritized gut of Claudina was discovered a couple of years ago. So they're definitely bilaterians. So we have like crown bilaterians in the late Ediacaran. But Claudina is I don't know like where they placed it in Annelida. I don't know if it's considered stem or crown. Either way, probably stem. But regardless, so these are different animals that are that small shelly fauna, and you also get quote small shelly fauna in the early Cambrian, which it increases in the diversity of organisms that make it up once you actually cross into the Cambrian. It's no longer just like worm tests. It's also like arthropod, like bits of shell and bits of like mollusk shell, things like that. Um, and what's interesting and I was actually literally just reading about this like yesterday or day before, for the arthropods, it's very difficult to tell whether those very early arthropods in the fossil record are either stem or crown. So you have groups like Isoxeida, which are like right at the start of the Cambrian, and there's a lot of debate as to whether they are either advanced advanced stem arthropods or basally derived crown arthropods, which I mean that's transitional fossils for you, right? So
Yeah, it gets so different. Like again, it's the victim of your own success. Like if we had every single, if we had a fossil of every single species ever, then we could not draw a line between where one ends and where one begins. It's and that's how you end up when you have too much of a good thing, basically.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a bunch of different arthropod groups like that. Like you have Fuxianhuida, Megakyra. You mentioned the Isoxeida. It's very hard to figure out if they're advanced stem arthropods or primitive crown arthropods. And then we do also have like pretty definite stem arthropods like the radiodonts, so like Anomalocaris. Then you have guys like Opabinia and Calentia, which are all definitely stem arthropods. And then you have like primitive crown arthropods like Morella. So yeah, we have like the whole. And as we were talking about or before, or whatever, like they're even like stem, they're the lobopods, which kind of look like velvet worms, sort of. They're just like kind of like worms with legs, very simple legs. And then we actually have worms that have kind of the beginning of like the little nubs that would eventually become legs. That's like the Cricocosmiids. And I'll put that in the chat down here. And we're going to talk about all these guys when we get into the brine shrimp's tail next. So yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Structures on the exists outside of an organism or an organism lives within them, or maybe there's another possibility. There's all sorts of, in the fossil record, we have these kind of structures inside organisms. So who knows? We really don't know. But you'll have a layer of the Tomotian fauna before you move, continuing on upward, you get your trilobites. The lowest layer of trilobites known as the Atbanian trilobites in the Atbanian fauna. And there's this, again, an invariable sequence. There's only 12 sites, as I said, where you have these sediments preserved, but in most of those sites we have all of these in the same order. And
it's almost like evolution or something.
Just the fact that you have an order, even if we don't know what in the world they are, is an interesting issue. Why is it that they have an order? Of course, evolution would say you just evolved one organism into another. And they might challenge us to say, well, how is it that you can have, if you can preserve bacteria, surely you can preserve other organisms. So, I mean, especially if you've got spores flying through the air, which are very resistant, easily preserved. Pollen flying through the air, easily preserved. Even if you're a long ways from everything else, why don't you have anything else but bacteria preserved in tens of thousands of feet of sediment? It looks as if, and
dang, that's crazy, bro.
Explanation,
evolution for the win. All right, wrap it up, boys.
At the time these things were.
Sorry, I was just being stupid. I was just saying, evolution for the win. Wrap it up, boys. We're done. We're done here. It's show's over. Evolution proved.
Good night, everyone.
And good night. Roll credits. Yeah. Yeah.
Formed is in fact bacteria. So it looks like there's a long period of time in Earth history where all that existed were bacteria. Then there was a significant period of time, because we're talking still about thousands of feet of sediment in some cases, where you have bacteria plus algae, as if some of the bacteria evolved into algae. And that's all that existed on the planet for a very long time. The algae is not, these acritarchs are somewhat resistant, and that's why we probably find them. But again, if there's real spores, real pollen, surely you'd have those things around. So the evolutionary explanation is that only bacteria existed here. Bacteria evolved into algae here. We evolved our protists from probably other bacteria here. And so on. And it's an easiest, it's the most elegant explanation for these creatures.
Cool.
And cut.
And so that brings us to a location that Steve has already alluded to in the East Mojave Desert at the Kingston Range. We have a nice place where the sediments are stacked up bent up at about 45 degrees, and so you can walk through.
I like before he gets to something else. Like when he mentioned the Timothian fauna, it reminded me of like a recent discovered fossil. It's called the Woofingella. And it's basically a stem lophophorate. And lophophorates include the bryozoans and brachiozoans, and they basically like the brachiozoans are like they're similar to clams, but they are not mollusks at all. And the bryozoans are like very weird filter feeders. And one of the closest living members are like the annelids. I believe the annelids are one of their closest living relatives. But even though the lophophorates don't look like anything like a worm, like the annelids do look like worms, but here you have a stem lophophorate that is basically an armored worm. It has the armor of the brachiozoans, but that's also the worm-like body plan of the annelids. It's a very interesting fossil.
We talked about Timothiids in the ragworm's tail. What did we say? I'm trying to remember what we said about them. Yeah, we did mention them. Yeah. We did talk about them. Yeah, they were. that they were like close to the ancestors of yes, of Lophophorates. Yeah, we did. Okay. All right. Yep. I'm just making sure. Cool stuff. All right. Armored worms. Everything is a worm. We can keep going.
Through lots of sediment in a relatively short distance, although it is the desert, that sort of thing. But if you start at, you got things stacked up like this. If you start down here, the sediments at this end are only contain, the only fossils are bacterial fossils. You get the VSMs at this point in the stack. You get the Ediacaran fauna over here, and there's an awful lot of sediment in between these things, okay? We're talking thousands of feet of sediment. Very soon thereafter, immediately above the Ediacaran, you've got Timoshan shelly fauna known, and then very soon after that, we got the Atbanian trilobites, and it's very dramatic appearance of trilobites here. So you can literally walk through a continuous sequence of these sediments and fossils.
Man, that is wild.
And it's not just true here, as I said. It's true in the other locations where this sort of thing is preserved. It's a total of 15,000 feet of sediment that you can walk through like this. So you're walking through thousands of feet, and 7,000 feet, all bacteria. That's all you have. Okay, and I don't want to disparage bacteria because I love them. They're wonderfully diverse and but it's that why isn't there anything else question that you have, and then there's another pretty close to 7,000 feet where you got bacteria plus the one-celled eukaryotic organisms. Before you finally get what some people think are the more interesting things.
Big W for evolution, I'm hearing.
It's when you move from, as Steve has already alluded to, if you back off of that area to the west of the Grand Canyon, move towards the Grand Canyon.
Like, did this guy work for
there's a great
Answers in Genesis,
unconformity,
right?
Yes.
So
I can only imagine Ken Ham sitting in the background like, oh, what is that? What the hell is this guy on about?
I think they might not be so happy with him because I don't know if any of you noticed, because I've been watching Kent Hovind videos from I think the early 2000s.
I pity you.
Yeah, but Hovind had a remote where he could change the slides. This guy has to walk back and forth to his computer and press a button on his computer to change slides. So AIG is really making him work for this one. You don't get the nifty tools. You walk back and forth like an amateur. I mean,
all the money was going to the Tower of Babel, Peter. Don't you know?
That's what it is.
No money for the remotes.
Yeah.
You mean the boat that won't float?
Yeah, and the tower that doesn't reach into the sky. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so.
Yeah. It's going to be outdone by Kent Hovind's upcoming ark that's going to be built between two molehills for $18,000, I think.
Listen, if God knocks over AIG's Tower of Babel, I will become a theist. You heard it here first.
Well, I don't know.
Like,
have you seen the Amazon headquarters?
The Amazon headquarters?
Yes.
Oh, I've seen the tweet recently. Yeah, it looks like the Tower of Babel.
Looks exactly like the Tower of Babel. It even has the hanging gardens. So, and that's still there. So apparently God thinks Amazon makes better use of the Tower of Babel.
What is this? You said Amazon?
Amazon headquarters. Yeah, it looks like the Tower of Babel.
I've not heard of.
I hadn't heard of it either, but as Nuzlik said, it was in a tweet.
I saw a random tweet.
That's fascinating.
Tweet, yeah.
That is whack. That is an insane looking building.
Yes.
You could say it looks like the Tower of Babel, but you could also say it looks like a giant turret.
Yes.
Like a cartoon turd.
A
Like, yeah.
shiny turd is still a turd. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay.
Oh,
Bananas.
but Peter, when you mentioned that you were watching like old Kent Hovind videos, I imagine myself being the young Professor X holding Logan, saying, "You poor man."
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a disease. It's how I got here, and I can't seem to shake it. Every once in a while, I need to watch something Kent Hovind.
Well,
And in
DM,
all
what I meant was I didn't know about their headquarters.
in all fairness, I met two amazing friends who came straight from Dinosaur Adventureland. So there is that. And
Oh,
had a-
Smitty mentioned the largest pyramid in the world is the Bass Pro Shop headquarters. I've actually been to one of the Bass Pro pyramids in Tennessee, and I thought it was very neat. I thought it was cool. I liked it. So
I hear you can go skinny dipping in Bass Pro Shops. There were tweets about that
I mean,
too.
you can do it once, I guess. You know,
You haven't seen the tweet of the drunk guy skinny dipping in a Bass Pro Shop? Oh, it wasn't a Bass Pro Shop.
That's what I'm saying. You can go skinny dipping in Bass Pro, but you can only do it once.
Yes. And then they take you away. Haha. Hoo-hoo. Sorry.
That's there. You're missing all of those sediments. There's
Oh, by the way, no one noticed, but I did catch the thumbnail for the next show. So if I don't send it to you, Jackson, remind me, because
What?
in this video was the best thumbnail for the next show. I'll send it to
Okay.
you.
Okay. All right.
one place in Nankoweap Butte where we get up close to those, but we're still missing a bunch of sediments even there. But in the Grand Canyon, you got the Chuar group here, which is exclusively the only fossils in the lower part of the Chuar group are bacteria. And just below, as you work your way up the Chuar, you eventually get to the 60-mile formation there on Nankoweap Butte.
Okay.
And just below Nankoweap Butte's summit there, just below the 60-mile formation, you get the VSMs. So even in the
Okay.
Grand Canyon, even though we don't have all of it, the first trilobites we get are actually significantly up into the Cambrian. They are not the Atbanian trilobites, and we're missing the Tomosian and we're missing the Ediacaran, but we are getting the first two of those, the bacteria and then the protists and algae. There's also, I don't know if, I've got the, in the Chuar group, we also have the acritarchs and that sort of thing as well.
Okay.
And here we got about 25,000 feet up between the lowest sediments with bacteria up to the place where we're getting close to the boundary.
Okay.
So we have a stratomorphic series. Again, even though it doesn't necessarily, we don't understand these things, it is nonetheless some sort of a sequence of fossils, which is in different parts of the world and must be or should be explained.
It's what I've been
does he find
thinking.
it-
It's what I've been thinking
Also,
about. This guy is holding a presentation about the flood. All he's done so far is explain how everything works within an evolutionary view. But he hasn't.
like I'm waiting for I'm waiting for the punchline. But
Yes,
how far
I
are we in
mean,
the video by now?
We're over 20 minutes in, and he hasn't
Oh my
explained.
gosh.
Yes, we're going like crazy, and he still
my
hasn't
goodness.
explained how the flood did this, because it
20 minutes. Good Lord.
2022 actually.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Oh
So,
my
so
goodness.
the first 20 minutes has been, this is what we expect of evolution, and it exactly matches what we expect of
Yes.
evolution.
And,
That's
and,
the first 20. That's the first 20 minutes.
Most
Yes.
honest creationist right here.
and no word about how the flood did this. In 20
Gosh.
minutes, not a single mention about a mechanism of how the flood deposited all of this. But it could.
Yeah. Icarus is right.
Well,
Icarus is right because he is wise. He's
yeah.
honest.
Well, in all fairness, this might still be the pre-flood thing, which also wouldn't explain anything because that would mean that there are no Adam and Eve fossils in the pre-flood layers. I mean, didn't any of them die up until the flood? Did everyone live happily ever after until they got drowned? How did all of this work? Where are the humans and the dinosaurs?
Yeah.
They were all pre-flood,
It's
weren't
very
they?
odd. I mean, yeah, because T-Rex was eating like watermelons pre-flood, remember?
Yeah, I mean, so where are they? I'm so confused.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
So the traditional interpretation is that it's an evolutionary sequence involving vast expanse of time.
Okay.
And so what do we do about this? Well, we looked at the Grand Canyon. You've already seen some pictures from this. We observed, Steve and I walked it at one point, then Andrew and I looked at it a little more closely.
Why are you looking at the Grand Canyon? According to Kent Hovind, the Grand Canyon was formed after the flood and all the layers were deposited there during the flood. So why are you looking at pre-flood layers in the Grand Canyon?
Remember, they think that everything that is like KPG impact everything that's like Paleozoic to the end of the Mesozoic, they think is, I believe, according to Wise, I'm pretty sure they think Paleozoic and Mesozoic are during the flood. So that's all stuff that was laid down by the flood. And then anything that is Precambrian is pre-flood, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that.
But they probably believe that everything that lived in the Paleozoic and Mesozoic, and also during the Cenozoic, lived before, and some of them also lived after the flood as well. Like
Yes. Yeah.
But only the Mesozoic and the Paleozoic got buried in the flood.
Right.
Not
How
the
weird.
Not the Cenozoic got buried.
Isn't it so odd how that happened? It's so weird. Yeah.
We looked at this stromatolite forest where we could actually, do I have that? Yeah, I have a picture here. Let's do that. Where you could, these bumps here, when you look at them in 3 dimensions in places where the sediment has eroded away to reveal them, there are these mushroom-shaped structures, which when cut in cross-section, you can sort of see it here, has concentric layers. It builds up in a pillar that gets larger and larger as it gets up towards the surface. Again, kind of mushroom shape. This is a hammer for scale. That might be me for scale. Oh, it looks like I got shorts on. That looks like Andrew for scale. I didn't think my camera worked.
Focus.
It's the two of us here playing around on these things. They're close enough together.
Squirrel. No,
that you can walk from one to another. You can jump from one to another, and yet their shape is such that if they were, let's say, ripped out of here and tossed in, they would probably be upside down. This is top heavy. So these things are all right side up.
Just like I like them.
In a very top heavy condition. So
my
it would
favorite kind of
suggest that these are
stromatolite.
actually in place. They haven't.
Jackson, I don't know if you remember that several shows ago, I did some trickery with After Effects and replaced the thing on screen while the professor was talking about it, and I had you on screen at some point. I've been thinking, so this whole part where he's talking about the round shapes and so imagine what you could do with footage like this. It's criminal.
Oh no.
It's criminal. I won't go there, but yeah, there's when you mentioned squirrel, that was the squirrel that I was entertained. Never mind.
Oh.
It would be good though.
Been ripped up from someplace and deposited somewhere else in the flood. And it strongly suggested to us that these guys, as Steve suggested, are actually a pre-flood. You're looking at a pre-flood surface where these little things grew up in a forest of them. And it's not seen in this picture. I don't know if I don't have a picture that shows, but you can follow this.
Another squirrel. So Jackson, I know you watch them too. There's this YouTube channel that focuses on a lot of this stuff about fossils.
You're talking about Benji Thomas?
No, PB.
Oh, PBS Eons.
Yes.
Yeah.
They always used to end with thanking people, and the last one they thanked was Steve. And Steve's no longer mentioned on PBS Eons, but this guy's constantly mentioning Steve. Did Steve deflect?
He was like, you know what?
He went from the
I'm going to go over to AIG now.
Yeah, he went from the Constantine Haase studios to AIG because maybe they paid better. I don't know. Because it's just...
That's pretty funny. Well, one of their guys is also named... I'm pretty sure Steve is also the name of one of the presenters for PBS Eons, I think.
Yeah, but they used to thank everyone at the end of every show. Yeah, and the last one they thanked was Steve. And Steve's been missing for, I think, about a year now. Steve left the building.
Maybe he couldn't... They don't do legacy members on their show.
Yeah.
They're just like, nope, if you don't give it to us, we don't say your name.
Yeah. Well, that was
they have some...
My second squirrel.
The one woman who's normally on it, she has a book on paleontology for I think it's kids now or something like that. I can't remember what her name is, but I thought that was kind of cool. That she wrote a book for kids on dinosaurs or something like that. I haven't watched one of their videos in a long time.
Well, I'm subscribed. I think everyone should be subscribed. They've got very, very cool videos.
Yeah, they do great stuff.
Almost every week. So small plug for PBS Eons.
Small, you can go over to that, that struggling channel, PBS Eons. Give them some love, help them out. Yeah. So anyway.
I mean, the people who will hear this are already here, right? I'll plug your channel on other channels because that's how it works best. We plug it here.
Rubbing the salt in the wound, are we, Peter?
No, we can't plug Jackson's channel on Jackson's channel. That just doesn't. That's
Guys,
not how it works.
Subscribe to me.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. We can keep going.
Kilometer. Literally walking, you could walk from one to another for a kilometer distance. It's amazing. There's thousands of these things. A beautiful locality. Stromatolites like these are very similar to stromatolites we have in the present. In Shark Bay, Australia, for example, most famous locality for them, probably the area that they're just about the biggest. They can get up 2 to 3 feet in height. In the present world, that's about the biggest we've ever seen them. They're in shallow water there along the ocean. Bacteria basically is, let's say, they're often in an intertidal zone or associated with an intertidal zone in the present world. As the tide goes out, the bacteria will shrink into the sand grains to protect themselves from ultraviolet light from the sun. Then when the water comes back in, they grow in between the sand grains and create a biofilm on the outside of this structure. Then when the tides go out again, there's usually some sand grains or whatever that get affixed to that. And so there's this alternating layers of organic and inorganic material that grow over time. And in the present world, it's a very slow process. And again, the biggest ones are only about 3 feet or so. These
Okay.
guys are significantly bigger, but they have the same structure, alternating layers of organic and inorganic material. We don't find fossils in them. We haven't, that I know yet, has actually observed the fossil bacteria in place in these things, but we presume that's what made them, as in the present. So we're talking about a forest of stromatolites built by bacteria. And when you see this in place, and this is almost what it would have looked like then, but underwater, it's as if it's a reef structure of there's enough of these things that they would baffle waves and function as a reef. And in other locations,
Those waves, gas would be flabbered.
such as in the Mojave and other layers of the Mojave, they can be 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers in size, not these little guys like this, but very, very large indeed. There's places on the Russian platform where they are
2 kilometers, very large. There's no American who's going to understand how large that is. I'm just
The
saying.
American mind cannot comprehend the kilometer.
The entire group that he's targeting will have no clue how big that is.
Peter, how many washing machines is 2 kilometers?
Several.
How many football stadiums is that?
Several, I think. At least.
How many?
Several.
Can you tell me like how many? Can we put it in like trucks, like end-to-end trucks or something? Because I'm not really sure what this kilometer thing is, but I think if we could do it in like end-to-end trucks, I think I could get an idea of the size.
I can link
No,
you to a
Patrick,
thread
mayonnaise is
on
not a
Twitter.
metric.
I can link you to a thread on Twitter on a guy who is going through all the metric system. It's one of the best threads ever on Twitter. But
one of my favorite Twitter posts is the large boulder the size of a small boulder. From like, or sorry, I think I got that backwards. I think it was a small boulder the size of a large boulder. One of those. Basically, this Park Service Twitter account posted like they post updates for the park, and one of them was like a boulder from like a rock slide had wound up on the road, and so they posted something like a large boulder the size of a small boulder on the road, and
yeah.
it was pretty great. Or where they're like, this sinkhole is like 20 hamburgers across or something like that. Yeah, those are always so good. Americans will use anything but the metric system.
Yes. Definitely.
But Peter, you know what they say? There are two kinds of countries: countries that have been to the moon and countries that use the metric system. I rest my case.
Hold on.
But they did not use the metric system during that event.
Yeah, that's. But aren't the Chinese about to get there?
Peter, I can't hear you over the sound of my freedom.
Remind me what they use. I don't know.
There's so much freedom over here, Peter. It's hard to hear you. Okay, anyway.
You're so free. You're free from reason.
I wouldn't go into the whole space thing because you now have a self-landing rockets made by the same guy who can't make a gas pedal in a Cybertruck. So I'm just.
Yes. I don't know if you guys saw the news that all the stupid Cybertrucks got recalled.
Yeah.
Because the accelerator was sticking. So yeah.
Yeah.
So that's cool. We love that. I actually saw one. There's at least one person here in Shreveport who has a Cybertruck. I've seen it multiple times.
Have they tested if the frunk stops closing if you hold your finger in between? Because that's an ongoing thing on YouTube as well. Those are the most hilarious videos. People almost getting their fingers cut off by their own Cybertrucks.
Yeah, like what was it? Some dudes were like using the door of the Cybertruck to like cut a carrot or something like that.
Yeah.
It was pretty crazy.
I think it was the hood that covers the engine, right?
The frunk. It's called the frunk. It's a front trunk.
Right.
So
Yeah, you
yeah,
can process your vegetables on the door edge. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
yeah.
Those
No,
things will like just absolutely kill you. So
I forgot.
yeah, Smitty says the cyber guillotine.
Yeah, I forgot. I keep forgetting the name of the comedian who did a video that went viral on Twitter. He described the Cybertruck as what you get if you inbreed two DeLoreans, which I thought was hilarious. I
That's so
mean,
good. In all honesty though, like I want SpaceX to succeed. I don't care about I don't want like Elon Musk is an idiot. We all know this. But like
mhm.
I actually legitimately want SpaceX to succeed because that's not Elon Musk, right? That's a bunch of like physicists and engineers and astronomers and I want them to do well. I want them to build rockets that work
Yeah,
and all that cool stuff. I definitely want SpaceX.
and
I like, but yeah, Elon Musk is an idiot.
and
So
since we have the Tesla Roadster in space, I think we should get a Cybertruck in space as well, and
mhm.
have Musk drive it there himself. Just saying, it's an idea.
He can be the first person on Mars. Yeah,
Yeah, and get there by Cybertruck.
yeah.
That would be
Like
impressive.
I want like spacefaring things like technology to succeed. I really do. I think that'd be cool. So anyway, all right, we can keep going.
Yeah, we got 8 minutes left. Just a heads
Okay,
up.
yeah.
10 to 20 kilometers in size. Huge
That
things.
sounds
Now
fake.
here's one. This is kind of a gully here. We're walking along and got a chance to see one in profile just before it erodes out. But here's another one that eroded out and fell over down the gully, and it falls upside down. That's what you would expect it to do. So seem to argue that these things are actually in
Peter,
place, and it's only when they're eroded out.
Peter, I know what you're thinking, and
Yeah,
I had the same thought.
yeah. This guy
Yeah.
is a treasure trove of making funny videos.
Yeah.
So
I saw it immediately. Yeah.
it happens.
Fascinating.
That
Anyway,
they turn over to their proper hydrodynamic position. So it suggests to us that sometime in the past, before the flood, because if these things are in place, the flood would have, you'd think, ripped them up and moved them around and they'd be upside down. So it suggests that this is actually a surface that preceded the flood. It is below the boundary that Steve was talking about, the pre-flood boundary as we defined it. We used the criteria that he defined, those 5 criteria, and it clearly places it, the pre-flood boundary above this layer. So it very well could be that this is a preservation of a pre-flood world, which would suggest that there were
man,
stromatolitic
I wish he
reefs
was gonna
in
say.
the
I wish he would say like where he thinks the pre-flood boundary, or sorry, where the flood boundary is. I wish he would. That would have been cool because I'm not 100% on my assessment. I'm sure Dapper knows, but I don't quite remember. I'm pretty sure Paleozoic and Mesozoic is flood for them, and pre-flood's Precambrian. I'm pretty sure. I'm not positive. Anyway,
in this place, which, if they were formed by bacteria in the similar way as modern bacteria produce stromatolites, that would infer that there's an awful lot of time involved.
wow. I
We need to
wonder.
add to the mixture these things, the picture, some of the pieces that have to be put together here, what are known as the upper Proterozoic diamictites. A diamictite is di-2 mixture. It's a mixture of 2 different sized rock fragments, basically. This would be like boulders inside a sandstone. And it could
Okay.
be rounded boulders or angular boulders inside a very different sized matrix.
Oh,
These are
okay.
examples of, this is This is the Kingston Peak Formation, which you've already heard reference to. Some pictures of some of the smaller clasts in the Kingston Peak. It's mostly sand, but it's got these, in this case, cobbles, round cobbles, angular cobbles. The angular cobbles would be called a breccia. The rounded cobbles would be called a conglomerate. Because there's two different sized particles mixed together, two dramatically different sized particles mixed together, sand and cobbles, it's called a diamictite. Because normally, in a water, certainly in the case of water deposition, water sorts things by size very efficiently. It's just, as soon as water gets involved, you pretty much put all the boulders together, you put all the sand together, and put all the shale together, and diamictite's a strange rock. It would suggest that water wasn't involved in the placement of it. Also, wind wasn't involved. Wind also would select things according to size. So it suggests a very different mechanism for emplacement of these things. Among these boulders are some boulders with flat surfaces with scrape marks on them, striations on them. And mixed also in here with these small things would be huge boulders. So you've got a diamictite with sand, lots of smaller cobbles and boulders, and then an occasional monster boulder in there. And
Dun, dun, dun.
some of the boulders would be striated.
Monster
They're
boulders the
smoothed
size of a
off on
small
one
boulder?
side and have scratch marks.
Yes,
What in the world
correct.
is going on here? This was, we see this in Pleistocene deposits. We see this downstream of glaciers. When glaciers pick up rocks, usually rocks fall onto glaciers from above, but sometimes they scrape up rocks from below. They get affixed into the glacier. If they're affixed into the base of the glacier drags the rock along its bottom surface and smooths off that one side and creates striations. Then it carries those things all the way down to the end of the glacier. There's a point at which the melting of the glacier equals the movement of the glacier, and at that point, the glacier dumps all of its material into a pile. Well, it's a pile of not just these boulders, but also the sand and stuff. It's grinding
point
some of
to
these
this?
boulders into a fine mesh. So it ends up a pile. The moraine at the end of the glacier is a pile of small sand-sized particles mixed with boulders and cobbles and including striated flattened boulders. And there's the occasional monster boulder that rolled on top of the glacier and gets dumped then into the mixture. These are all characteristics of things moved by ice. Again, it's not characteristic of things moved by water or wind. So these things are typically a diamictite is interpreted as due to glacial activity. So we have evidence of stromatolitic reefs, which would suggest long periods of time. We got diamictites, which is interpreted as a glacial deposit, which is slowly deposited. So we have an awful long period of time indicated here as it's understood.
We certainly have an awful
traditionally.
long time here.
So we're 33.
You know what? We're at the time.
33 minutes in now.
Oh my
And-
god.
And what he has done so far is confirm the actual timeline that doesn't have a flood. Is that what I'm getting from this? Because
So far, yeah.
he just said it indicates long periods of time.
He sure did. Yep.
Might be me, but isn't that what he should be arguing against instead of confirming it 30 minutes?
Well, maybe next time when we come back to this, he'll say, anyway, here's how I explain all of that. And we'll get that, I guess.
I don't know. So we're
Basically, he's like I imagine him like these toys for kids where they fit the round shape in the round hole and the star shape in the star hole.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's next video he's going to try to fit a round shape into a square hole, trying to fit it inside.
Yep.
I can't do it.
the
I can't
sad-
do it this way.
Nestle, the sad part is that everyone who watches a series from the UK called QI already has seen this. How you have a triangular shape that fits into the round hole, you have a square shape that fits into the round hole, and you have a round shape that fits into the round hole. It's famous. They've already done this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think so. I think we're gonna cut it there for today. So yeah, 33 minutes of confirmation for evolution, massive W for us.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll return to the Kurt Wise fan fiction next Thursday. As far as I'm aware, I don't have any things that are gonna come up and surprise me on that. So we should be back next Thursday. Well, all right. Well, thank you everybody for being here in the live chat, and thank you Peter and Nestling for being here with me.
I have to say one thing. I'm going to join the SPTV movement. So that means that I'm not sure if I'm going to be here next week or ever again. So for people who do not know what the SPTV movement is, it is the Suppressive Persons Television movement, which includes a lot of channels on YouTube who are currently reporting on Scientology. And I'm going to have one of the people who leads protests, active protests around the US against Scientology. And what has happened is that Scientology seems to attack every channel that reports about this. They will not only go after the channel, they will go after the people on that channel, try to find them in their private life and targeting them there. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I'm going to take my chances. I mean,
yeah. Well, please be careful with that. Then I need a producer for all my shows. Can't do it by myself.
If they can find me here, then yeah, then they're good enough to at least eradicate me, because
you have your guard dog.
Yes.
Guarding you.
Yes. So, well, he's asleep at the moment. Hey, wake up! Wake up! You have to protect me. Wake up! Wake up! Come on! Look in the camera. Wake up! There's everybody. No. Wave.
All right. Well,
terrifying guard.
All right,
dog.
everybody. Well, thank everybody for showing up, and we will see all of you next Thursday. So, bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.